Welcome back to Sprague Homestead. So for today on the Top 5 Tuesday, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to tell you about the 5 worst livestock medical emergencies we've ever had while we've been homesteading. So kind of one of the unfortunate things you're going to find out in homesteading, especially if you have livestock, is that there are some days that you just cannot get to a vet or there's no vet available, and you are going to have to become kind of like the medical emergency response team on your homestead. So we're going to take you through 5 of ours. Now this first one is going to be something we had to do along the way, and this is probably what, about 12 years ago, 15 years ago?
No, not that far. Probably about 9, 10.
9, 10, okay. So one of our llamas eventually, or I guess along the way, got an infection in his face. And I do have a picture of this. Of course, I couldn't get him to stand still and say cheese for video, but I did get a picture of it. Now, if I want you to look in this picture and notice on the right side of his jaw, there is a white line kind of below his ear, all the way down his jawline, getting towards his mouth. And it's probably good 4 inches in length where that scar is. That scar is actually an abscess that burst in his face and actually came through his skin to the outside.
So his dad was real prone to abscesses in his back teeth, but never really had anything major. So when it first popped up, I didn't think too much of it. We were living in Jackson, Mississippi, and could not find a vet that would do anything for llamas. If you've ever raised a llama, you know that finding a vet that will actually deal with them is already kind of few and far between. So it swelled up. I thought, okay, well, abscess, it's going to come and it's going to go like his dad. It's not going to be a big deal. We'll just watch it, and if it doesn't do anything, I'll start him on some antibiotics. Well, we're still not sure 100% that it was an abscess. Living in Mississippi, a lot of stuff is poisonous. But what happened was it looked swollen on the jaw for about a day and a half, 2 days. And on the next day, we came out, and his entire face had burst open. And when I say that, I'm not kidding. It was the entire skin flap where Kanan's pointing out that scar that's turned white on his face had literally flailed open. Not so deep that I could see the bone, but it was for sure the outer bit of muscling and skin. And called every vet in a 3-hour radius, and nobody would see us. The answer we got from everybody was, well, we could come out and euthanize, but other than that, they would have nothing to do with them. We don't know anything about llamas. Tough luck. So I called my dad. Now, I had been raising llamas since about 93 by this, and so we'd had him since birth, so I'd already had pushing 20 years of llama experience and had never seen this. So my dad said, well, first, remember, an animal is an animal. Second, you've got to keep his face together while you heal him. Start him on an antibiotic shot, and see what you can find to put his face back together. So basically what ended up happening is we got a halter on him, which was not easy because he's a bit of a brat. I can't even remember the stuff that we got, but some really tacky wound stuff. Globbed it all in there, put the face back together, wrapped some gauze, put a gauze pad on it, stuck the halter back on, literally to hold his face together, after I had disinfected it all out with an iodine wash I can't think of the name of, and then started him on antibiotic shots twice a day. And by day 4, it was a fight and a half to get him pegged down enough to do the antibiotic shots. I was having to wash his face every day with the disinfectant, and I can tell you that the smell was horrendous. We got lucky that we didn't get fly strike in it. And eventually it knitted up pretty good. It took about 2 weeks before it had knit up good enough and had quit draining where I could take that halter off and leave it off. And he is still with us today. Kanan just took a picture of him the other day, and he's, what, 16?
16, I think, yeah.
He's about 16, so it was awful, but it kind of just was what it was.
That's how you can kind of learn field surgery and trauma recovery
on
the fly. All right, so what is number 2? What is the second worst? Now you're thinking, what? That can't be. No. It gets better. Hang on. This is number 2. So the second one we'll talk about is one of our goats. And this is after we had moved from Mississippi to Oregon. We had a goat that she was pregnant and it was giving birth. And I remember this one because I won't say it's my fault, but I didn't know any better of it. So she was giving birth at the time and was having a little bit of difficulty. And this is the first time I'd seen an animal giving birth, so I didn't really know.
And I was out of town.
And she was out of town, so I'm just kind of like, hey, okay, she's giving birth. And so she was struggling with it. I didn't know to do anything, so I ended up leaving her, and it was at chores. I saw it at night, so I was like, okay, well, no problem. She'll be fine. I'll leave her till the morning. And when I came out in the morning, she really hadn't got any better. So she'd been in labor like 12 or 14 hours overnight through the dark, and I didn't know to do anything but to call the vet here on our farm and say, I think I've got a problem.
So I was 4 hours from here at a rabbit show. My parents live a mile down the road, a mile and a half. So I called my dad. Dad came down, manipulated it just a little bit, and out came the babies. What we didn't know is it wasn't so much that the babies were stuck or anything like that. It was that she was already having some problems with pregnancy toxemia, and we didn't recognize the signs or the symptoms of it. So what had happened in pregnancy toxemia, we were lucky we didn't lose her beforehand, but the onset of labor really kind of kicked her metabolism all kind of askew. So then on top of that, she's not pushing through the labor like she should have. They got the babies out, they got her to her feet, they got her nursing, but by the time I got home later that day, she was in full-blown trouble. So again, this is another one of those things where we called some vets, and the vets all said, oh, we don't do goats. This is kind of the thing about living in the middle of nowhere. So I went online, figured out what it was, and in 80% of cases, toxemia or ketosis in goats is fatal. And of course, we did end up losing her. We tried everything I could find online, just couldn't save her. We lost one of her triplets. The other two we were able to save and transition over to a bottle. And we did the bottle feeding thing for about a week before we found them a new home, because I just didn't have time for bottle feeding. But we did lose her. And now we know some of the signs and symptoms to be looking for toxemia, and have not had a single case since then. And we usually kid when we're breeding anywhere from 9 to 15 does at a time. So sad thing, but definitely a learning type deal.
Yeah, and you've actually helped pull a baby out of a goat since then.
Well, that same day that we lost her, it was before we had our tractor, and I called to see if Dad would come down with the backhoe and bury her, because our ground is pretty hard. And so while he was down, he and Kanan are out burying the goat, who was part boar, so a pretty big goat. One of my other girls literally laid down at my feet, went into labor, and the baby was stuck. So I got to bury a goat and birth a goat all in one day.
And from that I learned how to mix formula for goats, bottle feed, which is something I'd really never had to do. I did it once way back then with a calf it knew better what to do. They just said, hold this bottle and feed the calf, and the calf kind of did its thing. But this was me having to get mom to help with the baby and feed. So that's, again, no vets available. We learned, kind of the hard way through this goat thing, and then I learned how to mix bottle and become kind of surrogate mom to feed babies. So item number 3 on our list of the worst livestock medical emergency we've seen is going to be one of our female livestock dogs when she had a uterine prolapse.
So if you know what a uterine prolapse is at all, or if you don't, basically what happens is, for various reasons, during a female's heat cycle, the uterus actually tries to kind of fold itself out, and it does physically come out. he was out of town traveling for work. I went out, saw it, looked it up online, and they said some LGDs will do it. Not severe, but just a little bit, just to keep an eye on it. Well, it went full blown, and I mean the size of my fist. So got a hold of a vet. Nobody wanted to see her. They all said, oh, just keep it clean. Give it a couple days, it'll go back in on its own. Because nobody wanted to see a livestock dog. They want pets out here. They didn't want to deal with her. Because they flat out said, is she used to people? Well, no, she lives in the fields with the goats, and so they weren't real hip to seeing her. Well, we did that for a couple days, because they also said put her on an antibiotic in case anything happens, because basically you're dealing with organs trying to move themselves out of the body. So we did, and didn't go so hot. Like, it wasn't improving. She came out of heat, and it was not retracting. I had to have some help. We had to get her in the car because I finally got a vet that, now when I called initially, it was on a Friday, so they let her go all weekend. She came out of heat, and by Monday, they finally agreed on the phone that they would see her Tuesday. Now, she was in great spirits. I didn't have any problems with her other than the fact that she's got this prolapse out the back end that, I'm constantly worried we're going to, cause her some real damage. And got her into the vet. They went in and did an emergency spay, stitched her all back up and closed, and sent her home and said, 14 days, I think it was, we could finally cut her stitches out and she'd be fine. What we found out after the fact is that a lot of vets will also give them a shot to make sure that their hormone levels have dropped, and this vet did not do that. So 14 days comes, no swelling, cut the stitches. 7 to 10 days later, out it comes again and back to surgery. So the bad thing about all of this is she was never the same dog again. LGDs don't always want to guard after they've been spayed. Some do great. Yeah. I know somebody's going to say, oh, mine was spayed. And some of them are, but some of them do not. And Freya, unfortunately, was one that did not do so hot. This basically took all the gusto out of her. She wasn't really interested in doing much of anything. She would watch the goats, but from the barn. She wouldn't follow them around like she had done before. Mm-hmm. And come to find out, there was a lot of inbreeding problems where we had gotten her, and we lost her a couple of years ago, and we still don't know why. I mean, she'd been struggling a little bit with some arthritis, and then that was it. She was just gone. So yeah, vets not always real helpful. We've had some good vets, but here we've probably not. So.
Yeah. All right, so these are all big animals, right? And we raise poultry and ducks and chickens and all that kind of stuff. And there again, there's another one I find is I had some ladies that did not get along. So one day I go out to feed my turkeys out in the back, and we keep them in an enclosed pen, obviously. So at the end of chores, they get food and water, kind of get tucked in for the night. And I went out there and found that one of 3 of the turkeys I had, I think these are my blues, but
no, you're bronze.
Bronze. Okay, so they ended up 2 of them ended up ganging up on the 3rd one, who was kind of the smaller one, and they had picked her head open. Not just like a little bit of skin, they had opened her head up so you could see her skull, and it was bloody and gross. It was pretty terrible.
You raise birds, you've probably seen birds picking each other. It tends to be a real problem in chickens. Turkeys aren't real pecky. And these girls had actually been together for about 3 years. So it was kind of odd, but it was going into the mating season. And we had a nice young Tom, and they were all kind of sparring for his attention. And birds are birds, and once blood has been spilled, they kind of go crazy with it. So when he calls me from the rabbit barn and says, I need help, this poor thing, I honestly thought she was dead already. She was limp. Like he said, you could see the skull. Basically, they had picked off one entire side of her head, and her eye was so swollen, like the whole side of her face was so swollen. I thought for sure they had gotten her eye. The other eye wasn't open because she was in shock, which in birds is usually, that's game over. Shock is the end of it. But turkeys are also amazingly resilient. So we pulled her out and I cleaned her off the best we could. And we put some salve on her head to help clean it up, disinfect it, keep bugs out of it. And I moved her to a rabbit hutch, a big 5-foot by 3-foot rabbit hutch. And we nestled her in there and sat her in there and thought, okay, she's a goner, because birds just don't do so well. And the next day came out and she hadn't moved. She wasn't dead. She hadn't moved. And moved a thing of water with some antibiotics, back when you could get antibiotics for water right over the counter. Right in front of her with some food, kind of to the side, that because her eye, the one eye was opened a little bit. And she got some antibiotics in her, and she ate a little food. And it was about a 4-month ordeal. And I think it took her about a month and a half before that bird could even stand up. And eventually the swelling and infection, because we went through all the infection and all that, finally cleared up. And she did not lose her eye. And we actually sent her to another farm with some nice people that needed a companion for a handicapped turkey that they already had, that has screwed up leg, I think it was.
Yep.
So she got sent off there because we couldn't put her back in the flock that we had, and we didn't really need her in another flock. So we did send her off. And I know when I talked to him last spring, she was still doing fine, and they had hatched babies out of her, but pretty gnarly. Birds are pretty tough overall. Chickens tend to shock and die a little bit easier, but really surprised that turkey made it as long as she did, because it was bad. I thought she was pretty much a goner.
Yep. So that's kind of like our worst one on poultry. Now we've talked about big animals, we've talked about birds. Who can leave a video without talking about rabbits? So this one is all going to be Nikki, because I didn't really have anything to do with it.
Well, one of my does actually tore her shoulder open. So we had a bad storm come through, and my rabbits don't spook real bad typically. You know, we've had the Pyrenees near them. I drive a lot of tractors and equipment around the barn. So compared to a lot of people's rabbits, mine are pretty cool, and not a lot bothers them. Something bothered them the night that Olive hurt herself. So I went in to feed, and there was blood sprayed down the wall for about 4 cages. And I thought, dear God in heaven, what has happened in here? And I started at the one end, and nothing, and nothing, and nothing. And I got to Olive, who is a big blue and white magpie, and she was turned the other direction. And I looked in there, and I'm like, well, here's some, she had babies at the time that were getting ready to wean. And I'm like, here's some blood. But I'm not seeing enough blood for this spray pattern. So I reached in, and about that time Olive turned, and she is about an 8.5-pound rabbit. And she had a hole that was almost 2 inches across. And what I finally found when I got in there looking is, apparently she had spooked, and they'll run circles in their cages, and it looked like had hooked somehow her shoulder up on her feeder and tore her skin wide open. And I mean, it was all the way through. You could see the muscling of her shoulder. And it was summer. It was early summer, but it was still summer, which means you got to watch for fly strike. So the only thing I knew to do with it is isolate her, kind of wipe fly spray around the outside of it to make sure that we're not getting in the wound, but we're keeping flies at bay. And I used my Vetericin and just kept on, and it took her about a month to get it to close, but it did close entirely. We did not get any infection in there. I kept it real clean. Luckily, rabbits are pretty clean animals anyway, but I kept her isolated down into a carrier, which I'm sure was terrible for her, but it kept her from moving too much and re-injuring it, and she's made a full recovery.
Yep, no scars even. I'm surprised by that. There's no scars. You can part the hair. and you would expect to see something, like Prince's face. You'd expect to see some kind of
You
scarring
can
or anything.
feel, if you can really get in there and feel, you can feel a slight thickening of the hide in a spot. But yeah, the hair, I was worried, when you get a scar in animals, a lot of times the hair will grow back at weird angles. It'll turn colors, which for her, it's in a white spot, so it wouldn't have done that. But yeah, it knit perfect. I mean, there's no change in the fur there at all. Unless you know what you're looking for, you'd never even notice that there's even the thick spot in her hide.
So those are the 5 worst that we had on the homestead, and really, I gotta say, you would think that we'd have more, maybe, and not, but
We've had some other stuff.
Yeah.
We had a llama put a nail through his foot that got infected once. We had the debacle, which was the Angoras.
Yes.
We've had turkey babies break legs.
Yeah.
We've had a few of those.
And I think the one that we've probably had multiple times that it took us once to figure it out was a bot fly.
Yeah.
And that's basically a fly that lays eggs or whatever and else, and they get into the skin. And this is on Ginger, our little house dog. In the spring, she loves to run through the sagebrush and they will lay her eggs in that right in the sagebrush. She ran through there, got it in her fur, down into her skin, and we had something. I mean, really, this isn't part of the 5 worst, but it's still bad enough that we've had it multiple times. We had to take her into the vet because we couldn't figure out what this lump in her skin was. It had a little opening there. She was licking at it all the time. We couldn't figure it out. And I mean, the vet, honestly, the one time or one of the few times we've taken to a vet, he looked at it and said, "Oh, it's a bot fly, no big deal." He basically stroked the skin a little bit, popped the larva out,
Flushed it with saline and called it a day.
yeah, and we paid the bill, and so she's had multiples since then, because you can't keep her inside in the spring and that, but we know what to look for and the signs of it, and it's just something we take care of now ourselves.
And we've had cats fight and get injured.
Yes,
and
yes.
We've had goats crack ears open, hitting each other, headbutting the boys. So,
Yeah.
But definitely those 5 are the worst that we've had to deal with, either because we had to call a vet or start antibiotics. We try not to use a lot of drugs around here, so that's probably the worst. So, you're thinking, why are they talking about this? Because our video this weekend, we're going to talk about what you should have in your Homestead first aid kit for animals. So we're going to kind of go over an overview of things you ought to have, and then talk kind of specifically about if you're dealing with guard dogs, goats, poultry and rabbits, because there are some stuff that's pretty specific depending on what you've got. We're not going to talk about bigger animals because we don't raise any bigger animals.
Yeah, right.
And usually you can get a vet to deal with, cattle or horses, that kind of stuff. But a lot of times your sheep, goats, smaller stuff, the vets don't really want to see, and it's not cost effective to take them anyway. So unless it's a big time emergency, you'll find that you're going to have to do stuff yourself. So we'll talk about what should be in your kit. Probably going to be a pretty long video because there's quite a few things that I like to keep in my kit.
There is, but the whole point of this is that, like she said, a lot of times a vet is not going to see a lot of your stuff, and livestock dogs are probably not hip to car rides into town. The further you live away from the city, the more you're going to have to rely on yourself or someone close by that can do a lot of this stuff for you. And it's always better if you have more knowledge that you can do it yourself than to call somebody else to come over to the farm or the homestead, or have to take something into town in order to get it serviced.
Absolutely. So that's going to come up Saturday. So if you have stuff that you specifically want to ask, go ahead and leave it down in the comments and we will get back to you, or include it in the video for this weekend. And that's it, right?
Yep, that's it. It's Sprague Homestead, the 5 worst and a couple extras livestock medical emergencies we've had.
We'll see you next time. Happy homesteading.